Hey, would your mom be pleased with you if she tasked you with either catering or preparing the family's turkey for Thanksgiving? And after weeks and weeks of recommending that you get on this early and not waiting to the last minute, you decided not to trust her in that advice and thought Wednesday night would be a good idea to figure everything out. And as a result, you show up on Thursday with a box of leftover pizza. How pleased would she be with you in that? Not very, right? Not very pleased. Well, just like your mom, God isn't pleased with us when we don't trust him. And so today, God is going to show us how we all can take a big step forward in trusting him. And to get us there, I want to tell you about a story that happened to me when I didn't trust someone, and it actually put a lot of people in danger. Now, I was in high school, and it was my first job. I was working as a petroleum distribution engineer. Now, I know that may sound impressive, but what that really means is that I worked at an Exxon full-service gas station, and I pumped gas for people, okay? Not that very impressive. Well, I mean, petroleum was distributed, but there was no engineering involved, right? And here's the thing, as a high school kid, man, that was a great first job. Number one, you're not flipping burgers, right? And it didn't pay just minimum wage, it paid a little bit more than that. But even better for me, because I'm a car guy, I got to work with cars. And by work with cars, I meant put gas in cars. And I'm telling you, it was a great first job. One of the other cool things about this job is that our Exxon station was also a location for a rental car company. And every now and then, the company would dump a fleet of cars at our location, and it would be my buddy and I's job to clean the cars out, fill them up, and get them ready to be in service. And that was really fun because in order to do that, we had to drive the cars from the back of the lot to the front of the lot and then back to the back of the lot, which meant we got to drive cars. Now, gotta be completely honest with you. You know, I'm like a 15-year-old teenager, and just like a 15-year-old teenager, I thought I knew everything about everything. Anybody ever been there, right? How many of you have a teenager who is there right now, right? You know what I'm talking about. Well, here's the deal. I remember when I first started working at the station, my direct boss, he was the night manager, and honestly, and I really don't like this. I'm really kind of sorry to admit this, but I really didn't respect him. I mean, here is this guy who's in his mid-30s, and honestly, he had ascended to his peak, job, which was working at a gas station. And I'll be honest with you, I just didn't think that he really had anything to offer me that I didn't already know. And I know that's awful, right? I'm just owning that right now with y'all. But I remember on my first day when they were giving us the safety training, I just remember thinking to myself, whatever, I don't really need to pay attention to this. I know how to pump gas. What could go wrong? See, I didn't trust that he could teach me anything that I didn't already know. Well, a lot could go wrong. I remember later, it was one evening we were working, and the rental car place dumped a fleet of cars, and my buddy and I, we had to clean them up, fill them up, and park them out back. And man, we were going at it. We were having fun doing it, and a customer came in, and so my buddy had to stop working on the car that he had at the full service aisle, and he had to help the customer. And I was just finishing up the car that I was working on, and he said to me, hey, Heath, do me a favor. When you take that one to the back, don't get a new one, but come take mine and put it in the back. And I was like, yeah, no problem. So I, parked the one I was working on, and I came to the front, hopped in the car, and again, frontal lobe not fully connected yet, right? Didn't really think that, there was any safety issues at all, but I hop in that car, I start it up, drop it in gear, and punch it, squill the tires all the way around the station back to the spot. Yeah, complete idiot. I get out of the car, And as I get out of the car, I notice something odd on the back side of the car. It was the gas nozzle with the hose still attached. Yep. And that's when my mind registered the screams that were happening in front of the station. So I go running to the front, and this is what I discovered. My buddy was doing everything he could to try and turn the pump off, but squirting out of the side where the hose used to be was just gas, just pouring out. I watched the night manager, our boss, running across the bays in the garage trying to get to the emergency shutoff valve. And then in the office was the lady who worked for the rental car company trying to extinguish her cigarette that she used to chain smoke. It was chaos, and I caused it. And I caused it all because I didn't really respect or honor my boss, and I didn't trust that he could actually offer me anything that I didn't already know. But if I would have respected him, I would have paid attention, and I would have made sure every time I got in one of those cars that the gas nozzle was back at the pump. Well, I didn't, and as a result, 96 gallons of gas dumped out onto the black top of our gas station, which was at one of the busiest intersections in all of metro Atlanta. We had to shut down the station for the night, losing all the revenue that we would have made if we were open. We had to call the fire department because they had to come out and properly dilute the gasoline so that one spark wouldn't blow up the entire area. And the owner of the station, we had to call him. And let's just say he wasn't pleased, okay? And here's the deal. I had to sit in the weight of that because it was my fault. Let me ask you, have you ever had to sit in the weight of someone who isn't pleased with you because of something that you've done? It's not a fun place to be. So let me ask you this. What about God? Is God really pleased when we trust him? Of course he is. Of course he is. Well, how pleased do you think God is with you right now? Is he pleased or is he not pleased because of the level of trust that you put in him? Well, the minor prophet Malachi has a lot to say about pleasing God. And so the question that we need to answer today is, what is Malachi's message for me? Well, this is where Malachi takes the stage. And it's not Malachi, by the way. He wasn't Italian. He was Jewish. And he served in Israel about 100 years after the temple is rebuilt. God's people have rebuilt the temple. It's functioning. Offerings and sacrifices are being made there. But here's the deal. Malachi points out that they weren't trusting God. And so they weren't pleasing God. And God sends Malachi to use him to call them back to God's heart. Now, we don't know a lot of the details about Malachi and his life. The only thing we actually know is his name. And that might be the point that God is trying to make, because his name in Hebrew means my messenger. See, we don't know a lot about Malachi, I think, because God wants us to focus on the message that he gave his people, because it can make a difference in our life today. So let's start by reading Malachi chapter 1, verse 6. Here we go. The Lord of heaven's army says to the priest, a son honors his father and a servant respects his master. If I am your father and master, where are the honor and respect that I deserve? Okay, I want you to underline those two words, honor and respect. Here's your backstage access for today. Honor and respect is based on trust. Because if you don't trust God, you're certainly not going to honor or respect him. So throughout the book, Malachi is telling God's people the ways in which they aren't trusting God, and as a result, aren't honoring him and aren't respecting him. So, we're gonna get into it, and we're gonna see over the next couple of chapters what exactly they were doing to dishonor, disrespect, not trust God, and as a result, what we can do differently, okay? So the first thing is, this is how Israel didn't trust God and how I can. So the first part, they were offering defiled sacrifices. We find this in Malachi 1:7. Now, the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the law, it tells God's people exactly the kinds of sacrifices that God desires. He wants perfect sacrifices. He wants animals without blemish. He wants animals that are not sick. He wants animals that aren't lame or aren't blind. God is very clear that when his people are to sacrifice and offer to him, that he wants them to offer their best. Well, unfortunately, the people in Malachi's day, they weren't doing that. Instead of giving God their best, they were giving God their leftovers. The animals that they were bringing to sacrifice were sick. The animals that they were bringing to sacrifice were lame. The animals they were bringing to sacrifice were blind. They weren't giving God their best. That was the issue. They were giving God their leftovers, their box of pizza on Thanksgiving. And it showed that they weren't trusting God. So therefore, I will offer my best. I will offer my best. See, Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, so we don't have to offer animal sacrifices to God anymore. And instead, God wants you to offer him your heart. He wants to be first place in your life. He wants you to give him your very best, not your leftovers. So what that might look like for you is tomorrow when you wake up, before you make your coffee or scroll through your phone or head off to work, ask yourself this question: what is God gonna get from me today? My best or my leftovers? And then ask God to show you what he wants from you today. And when he does, trust him and give your best to whatever he says. Now consider this. God has set the example for us in this. God has actually given us his best. God has given you his best, and his best was his son Jesus. Jesus, who was God, was sent to earth to also become a man at the same time because God wanted to offer his best for you. And what I mean by that is that every single person who has ever lived, from Adam to the very last baby that'll ever be born, they all have done the same thing, myself included, and you. We all have said to God, I don't want to live life your way, I want to live life my way. And that is sin. That's the heart condition that causes every act of sin. And because we all have sinned, we sit in judgment from God. See, God is perfect. He's holy. He can't come into contact with anything that isn't perfect or holy. And so in sin, we're separated from him. We sit in his judgment. But here's the good news. God doesn't want that to happen. That's why he sent his best. Because when Jesus came here, he never sinned. He never once said to God, hey, I want to do it my way. And as a result, Jesus was able to be the perfect sacrifice for sin. And when Jesus died on the cross, he died in your place so that you wouldn't have to. He took the penalty for your sin so that you could be forgiven. And when God brought him back to life on Easter morning, God gives you an opportunity to be redeemed and restored in your relationship with God, and it's through faith in his son, Jesus. If you believe that Jesus died on the cross for you, if you ask God to forgive you, and if you make a commitment to let God have control of your life for the rest of your life, you'll be forgiven. You'll be restored into a relationship with God, and you'll be redeemed, and that means you move from judgment to his grace. And in his grace, when you die, you get to spend eternity with him in heaven. See, God gave his best so that you could be redeemed. Now, you become a Christ follower by praying a prayer of faith in what Jesus has done for you. In other words, you pray and you believe that Jesus died for you. You ask God to forgive you, and then you give him control of your life. We have a sample prayer of faith that you can pray to become a Christ follower. It's in your message notes. And if you would like to do that today, I just invite you to go ahead right now, pray that prayer. Listen, you can catch up with me later, okay? I'll keep going, but you just take this time right now to pray and let God redeem your life. All right. Now then, here's the next way Israel didn't trust God and how I can. They were marrying people who worship idols. Marrying people who worship idols. We find this in Malachi 2:11. A little more backstage access here for you. And this sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I want you to truly understand this. This has nothing to do with marrying someone from a different race. Now listen, verses like this and others in the Old Testament have been used to justify racism. They've been taken out of context to do that. Race isn't the issue here. Faith is. See, the other nations that were surrounding Israel, they didn't worship the living God. They worshiped statues made into idols that represented false gods. And God knew that if Israel began to become one with people who worshiped false gods, then they would be drawn away from worshiping the one true God. That's why he said, don't marry them. It had nothing to do with their race. It had everything to do with their faith. But guess what? The people in Malachi's day, they didn't trust God. And so they were marrying people outside of their faith. And as a result, they were being drawn away from their worship of God, and they began to worship idols. That's what they were doing. So therefore, I will worship God as a family. Now, most of us, we don't worship an actual statue to a false god, right? But idols can actually be anything that takes more importance in our life than our relationship with God, than our faith in God. And if you understand idolatry in those terms, well, guess what? There are plenty of things that we can very easily worship as idols. Now, I don't want to stop preaching and start meddling here, okay? But I do want to share from a pastor's heart. One of the things that I see this community's biggest act of idolatry is worshiping our kids and the things that we push them to do that we think will get them ahead in life. Now, I'm not saying that your kids shouldn't be your focus. I'm not saying that you shouldn't love your kids and want the best for them. Not saying that at all. I'm not saying that you shouldn't help them do good in academics or be in the band or play sports. Not saying that at all. But let's do a comparison, okay? How much time do you spend in the extracurricular stuff of your kids each week? I mean, going to practice or going to, competitions or going to games or personal instruction and practice. How much time do you spend a week doing those things? On the flip side, how much time a week do you spend in worship as a family? Being a part of a small group, coming to Sunday worship, personal daily Bible reading and prayer, doing the things that you need to do to grow in your relationship with God. How much time do you spend doing that each week? Let me give you one more question. Do you consistently miss small groups, miss Sunday morning worship to go be a part of your kids' stuff. Now, here's the hard part. Here's the hard part. If you spend more time on your kids' extracurricular stuff than you do in worship as a family, if you're consistently missing small groups or not being a part of a small group or missing Sunday worship to go do the stuff that you think will get your kid ahead in life, it quite possibly could be that your kids or the stuff that you think will get them ahead have become an idol in your life. Let me ask you this question. What do you want floating around in your kid's head the very first weekend they're away at college deciding what they're gonna do? Do you want them to have a really firm grasp on physics or know how to hit a curveball? Or would you rather that they have had a real faith experience in Jesus Christ? That they know how to pray and read the Bible and hear God's voice when he's speaking to them? Would you rather that they know how to make wise decisions? Would you rather that they understand what healthy relationships are and know how to have them? Would you rather understand and be committed to living within God's moral boundaries? Would you rather that they actually are committed to glorifying God with their life and making an impact for him? Listen, as a dad who has sent 3 off to college and is about to send his 4th this next month, I can tell you without any hesitation that the latter is better than the first. So, here's the reality. When you put all your eggs in the basket of things that you think will make your kids better, but it pulls them away from what will actually do that, which is having a growing, faithful relationship with God, you're worshiping an idol. Okay, here's the next way Israel didn't trust God and how I can. Being unfaithful to their spouses. This is Malachi 2:14. And listen, this is one of the most harmful, one of the most destructive sins a person can sin. It's when they're unfaithful to their spouse. It's devastating to everyone. And it breaks God's heart. Now, if that's something that you've walked through or you are walking through, I just want to say, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that you've had to do that. I'm so sorry for the pain that has happened, the trauma that has happened to your family. But regardless of your role in it, I hope you hear this. God loves you. God has not abandoned you. God has not given up on you. And as much as you want to run from God in this moment, this is the time to actually lean in to him. Because he's a loving Father and he's a God who heals broken things. And when you trust him, even in the difficult things in life, he brings healing and transformation. And so I want to encourage you in that. But the reality is being unfaithful to your spouse is not trusting God in an epic way. So therefore, I will stay faithful. You know, someone asked my wife, Jennifer, has she ever considered divorce? And she said, divorce never, murder occasionally. Actually, she didn't say that. Billy Graham's wife said that. But Jennifer agrees wholeheartedly. Listen, for us, divorce has never been part of our accepted reality. We decided early that the only way forward was to work it out, to work on our relationship. And listen, the biggest part of that was determining that other people are off the table. We don't allow anyone else to be an option, no matter how bad our relationship seems to be. And that forces us to stay with each other, to put each other as a priority. Because the solution is not outside our marriage, the solution is together working on what needs to be fixed. So no one else gets to meet our emotional, our physical, and our spiritual needs. No work wives or no work husbands, just Jen and me. And it's worked pretty good for the last 32 years. So we're gonna keep doing it, which is the way God says to go in the Bible. Now, if you trust him, you'll go that way too. Well, here's the next way Israel didn't trust God and how I can. Not tithing. We find this in Malachi 3:8. I don't know if you know this or not, but the word tithe means 10%. So when you hear the phrase tithing, what it literally means is giving your first 10%. And the reason we add the word first there, because in the Old Testament, again in the law, there's this concept of bringing God your first fruits. So listen, our culture today is radically different than Israel back in the day. Look, they didn't have white collar 9-to-5 jobs, okay? They were an agricultural society. And so when God says, I want you to give a tithe, what he was literally saying, and he spells it out in the Old Testament, I want you to take the first 10% of your harvest and bring it to the storehouse and give it back to God. Now, this is what it actually looked like when they did it. They would harvest the very first 10% of their field, and then they would stop harvesting the rest of the 90% to take a week or so to get the first 10% to the storehouse so that they could give it back to God. And this is what they were doing in this. They were placing their complete dependence on God. It wasn't just the 10% dependence, because what happens when they stop to bring the first fruits to the storehouse and a disaster strikes in the remaining 90%? See, they were stopping to put their complete trust in God over the rest of the 90%. If a fire destroyed the field or if a natural disaster flooded the field, they were literally saying, we're giving God first because we trust him with all the rest. It was an incredible act of faith. Now here's the deal. In Malachi's day, the people, they weren't just harvesting it all and then bringing 10%. They weren't bringing anything. They weren't even remotely thinking about tithing. And here's the thing. Tithing is placing your dependence on God. Well, they weren't doing that. They were actually declaring their independence from God. And God wasn't pleased. God wasn't pleased. So, therefore, I will give. Now, this could actually be the biggest indicator of whether or not you're trusting God. Because the tithe has never been about the money. It's always been about your trust in God. If you trust God with everything in your life, then you'll bring the first fruits, the first 10%, and give it back to him. Now, here's the cool part. If you trust God with everything, God takes care of you. And when you trust God with everything, what you're literally saying to God is that I believe that my life will be better when I give you control of everything than if I were trying to control everything myself. That's what the tithe does for you. So, here's how you can move forward in your faith and in your giving. First of all, and these are some fill-ins, and we're gonna come really fast, so get ready. You can go from giving nothing to something. If you aren't giving anything at all, just give something. And then you can go from something to regularly. If you give something, move to giving that something regularly. And then you can go from regularly to tithing. If you give something regularly, move to giving the tithe regularly. Listen, Malachi in chapter 3, verse 10 says this about tithing. It says to test God in this. If you tithe, then God will bless you. Now, this does not mean that if you give 10%, God's gonna give 100, okay? No, doesn't mean that at all. But what it means is that if you tithe and put your dependence on him, he'll take care of everything in your life. And sometimes that might be a financial blessing. But more than likely, it's gonna be giving you peace in the storm. It's going to help you know the wisdom and to prepare how to avoid the storm in the first place. In every area of your life, God promises to take care of you. That's the blessing. That's the blessing. So let's see what happened to the people in response to Malachi's message. I love this. This is Malachi 3, 16 through 18. This is what happened. Then those who feared the Lord spoke with each other, and the Lord listened to what they said. In his presence, a scroll of remembrance was written to record the names of those who feared him and always thought about the honor of his name. They will be my people, says the Lord of heaven's armies. And on the day when I act in judgment, they will be my own special treasure. Hang on to that. We're going to look at that in a second. I will spare them as a father spares an obedient child. Then you will again see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who don't. Listen, after being confronted by the prophet Malachi, there were people that got together and said, we are gonna start trusting God together. And then they began talking about how they could do that and what it would look like in their life. And when they did that, God in heaven said, start writing down what they're saying. Now, it wasn't because he was gonna forget, it was because he was so proud. And it was almost like he was saying, hey, listen, I'm so proud of my kids. Do you see what they're doing? Take a look at these pictures. Here's this video. And I love this. God says that they become his special treasure. The word for that in Hebrew is segula. And it gives the imagery of a king who has a vast wealth, but he has his private chamber, and in his private chamber, he has a special treasure chest where he keeps the things that he most loves and he's most proud of. And God says that the people in Malachi who responded to him and began trusting him with everything, they became his special treasure. They became the kids that he brags on, that he keeps the photos, and he keeps the pictures that they draw on his fridge. When you trust God and follow him and honor him and respect him, you're his special treasure. You're his kid that he brags on. So trust him with everything. Give him your whole heart. Give him your best, because he will not disappoint you. Hey, listen, if you want to become a Christ follower again today, I just want to remind you, go ahead and pray that prayer of faith. Love for you. It's in your message notes. Do that. Want to give you a heads up, man, I'm so excited for next week. Pastor Mike's gonna be back. He's gonna be teaching a brand new series called Who Does That? It's gonna be really good. So come on back and bring some friends.